Hi, everybody. Alan Arnette here with another podcast on the blog on alanarnette.com. It is Saturday, November the 2nd, 2024, and this is another episode in my series on the seven summits, the highest peak on each one of the seven continents. There are seven of them. Well, maybe eight, maybe nine. We've talked about that a lot, so I won't go into it. Today, though, we're talking about one that's absolutely clear and unambiguous. It's the highest mountain on the continent of Africa. Well, technically, it's a volcano, and Kilimanjaro is about 19,340 feet, just under 6,000 meters, and it is one of the most popular hikes, climbs, treks in the world. About 25,000 people attempt it each year. I'm guessing around 80% make it because it is an incredible experience, highly supported and suitable for the young, the inexperienced, and the old alike. And here's why. Tanzania just does an outstanding job of managing the mountain, mainly through the use of porters that are required by everybody. I guess it's possible that you could go there, you could carry your own kit, but you're required to hire a porter. I guess the porter could go along with you, but most people just carry a day pack with about 10, 15 pounds in it, mainly maybe an extra layer or two, maybe a hat, gloves, depending upon the weather, some water and food, and that's about it. The porters carry all the group gear. They'll even carry your sleeping bag. They set up the camps. They cook your food. It's really a pampered, glamping type of an experience. But don't be fooled. At almost 20,000 feet, the altitude is what gets a lot of people. And, there's, again, not a lot of statistics on death rates and on summit statistics, but a handful of people will have issues every year, and there are a couple of deaths. Most of those are related to altitude, and most of it is driven by people who go way, way too fast going up. You can get in trouble when you start at around 10,000 feet and you go to 20,000 and you don't take time to acclimatize. So most treks go 7, 8, maybe even 9 days these days on something like the Northern Circuit. But if you do it under like 3, 4, 5, 6 days, there's a high chance of getting some type of altitude related problem. So that's why, selecting a guide and selecting a program, cheapest is not always better. You have to really look at the details and understand what's under the hood when you're making your decision. So Kilimanjaro, you fly into the airport near Moshi, Mount Kilimanjaro Airport, I believe is a technical name of it. You go through customs, a pretty civilized process. I flew in from Amsterdam, and there were probably 200 or 300 people in the airplane, so it took quite a while to go through customs, maybe an hour, which isn't that bad, relatively. And you have to have a visa. They'll look at a malaria vaccination card that you got back home before you go. Highly recommended. Malaria is fairly common in Tanzania and that part of Africa, so you want to be safe. But then you go through there and then you meet your guide service and head on over to Moshi and go check into your hotel and get a good night's sleep, get over the jet lag. The next day is really a treat. You go into Moshi and go to the town market. Oh my gosh, that's one of the highlights of climbing Kilimanjaro, along with a couple others that I'll highlight. But the market in Moshi is just a feat. It's a cultural feast for the eyes. There are ladies selling their goods, selling all the way from food to spices to woven items, clothing, rugs, art. Just very, very colorful. I've got pictures on the blog and on the YouTube video for those of you that are listening to this on audio. So I invite you to go take a look at that because I've got a ton of pictures of not only climbing Kilimanjaro, but also going on the safari, which I'll get into at the very end of this. But you go in there and one thing you got to be careful of. I got in a little bit of trouble. I was taking pictures just right and left, and the ladies were looking at me and shaking their head and frowning at me. And I finally realized that, it's polite to ask if you can take their picture, and even more polite to offer them a little bit of money to take their pictures. So once I figured out the protocol, I was able to take the pictures and get some fantastic shots. And they were happy because they made a little extra money. And I was thrilled because I've got some trophy images of the Moshi market and the cultural diversity that goes on there. Another thing to do while you're in Moshi is go to one of the many, many cafes and pick up some of the great African coffee. It's just absolutely wonderful taste, very relaxed environment, just a wonderful, wonderful village or city of Moshi in Tanzania. So, once you experience that from a cultural day, probably the next day you head on over to begin climbing Kilimanjaro. You start at the gate, one of the three gates, one of the three entrances. There's multiple routes. I'll get into the routes briefly in a minute. And you head up, and I took one of the routes that starts around 10,000 feet, and you go through five different what are called microclimates. And each one of those is a different area of foliage and fauna that you see. The guides that are with you, the porters, they do a great job of explaining what you're seeing, the topology, the geology. And you have to stop and you look at this. You see all the way from looks like a bamboo tree to a cactus, and then a little scrub brush. It's just crazy how you go through the different microclimates, and that's all related to the volcanic activity and the different temperature zones and the different moisture zones that you have on Kilimanjaro. We'll talk about the glaciers in the summit crater later on, but part of keeping Kilimanjaro as much as Tanzania can, they were really afraid that those glaciers were going to melt out one day, and so this goes back. Let's say go back 15 years ago. They began planting tens of thousands of trees on the actual volcano itself, and slowly but surely it changed the ecosystem that allowed it to keep more of the moisture and moderate the temperatures, so that the glaciers have reduced the rate at which they were melting. Back in 2011, 2010, they predicted by 2020 that the glaciers would all be gone, and that simply didn't happen. And part of that's due to the preventative efforts that Tanzania took. So good on them, fantastic on them. One of the things that also Tanzania does is they require you to use the porters, and the porters carry all your group gear. And like I said, you just carry a day pack with just a little bit in it. But the porters are just incredible. They're phenomenally friendly. They're jovial. They're carrying a rice sack on their head with maybe 30 pounds on it, probably in a backpack as well. Another thing that you have to look into when you go to Kilimanjaro is something called the Kilimanjaro Porters Assistant Project. Kilimanjaro Porters Assistant Project. That's a formalized organization which serves to protect the welfare of the porters, to make sure that they get properly paid, they get fair treatment by the guide services, and that they carry proper loads, and also that visitors can support them by donating clothing. It's very difficult for them to get the proper jackets and the footwear, so a lot of people that go to Kilimanjaro will either donate their gear at the end of the climb or bring over extra gear that they've got just sitting in the closet that can be much better used by those porters. So all in all, just a fantastic environment relative to the porters themselves. The best time to climb Kilimanjaro is, since it's really close to the equator, is January, February, and then July through October. March, April, and November are considered rainy months. People do it all the time. It's really a year-long climb since it's near the equator, but some months are better than others relative to the rain. The second highest mountain in Africa is Mount Kenya, and it's a little more difficult than Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is really a high-altitude walk. It's really a trek. You're not going to be using your hands to be climbing it on the normal routes, but Mount Kenya, you do definitely near the top. You're doing full-on climbing using your hands and your feet. It's a little bit lower, about 17,000 feet versus 19,340. So not quite as high, but definitely more difficult. Kili is really a straightforward climb. There's no real objective danger except for the cold summit weather. Porters carry everything, like I said before. The routes are pretty dry also. There's rarely snow. You can get rained on at the lower elevations, but you definitely can have cold, harsh conditions on the summit. But there's nothing like crevasses or avalanches you got to worry about, not even rockfall, again, on the normal route. So it's a pretty safe climb. And given the porter support, it's really accessible to young people, people with little experience, and older people that are looking to have an experience of a lifetime by climbing one of the seven summits. It can, though, let's talk about the downside. On the summit night, it can be brutal. You can have very high winds. It can be very, very cold. It can have a still air temperature of 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It can drop down to minus 20 Fahrenheit wind chill. And so, this is frostbite weather. And again, if you're rushing it, then there's a high risk of getting frostbite or getting some type of altitude sickness. About 25,000 people try Kilimanjaro every year. The summit rate is my best guess is around 60, 70%. And the people who don't make it are people that rush it. They do go in something like 3, 4, 5 days instead of the 6, 7, 8, even 9 days on some of the routes like the new Northern Circuit that come up. So there's multiple routes in the mountain. Again, it's relatively tame compared to like on Denali, where you're carrying a big old pack of 50, 60 pounds and pulling a sled. Nothing like that on Kilimanjaro. You're carrying the day pack, as I mentioned. You cross the microclimates and you go through and looking at all the way from a cactus to looks like a palm tree. It's just crazy. I did the Machimi route, but the Lamosho route is a little bit more scenic, but it's also much, much more crowded. There's also huts on that route. And so, the route I was on, it was all tent clamp camping, which was fine for me. And again, the porters set up your camps, you arrive, they've got hot drinks for you, coffee, tea, whatever. And then they cook a fabulous dinner. And again, it's very, very, very civilized. Like I said, you start around 10,000 feet, you gain 2 or 3,000 feet, maybe less a day over the 7, 8 day period, and then eventually you hit the summit itself. On the route that I took again, there's only one part that I would call semi-challenging, and that was the Bronco Wall. Really, it's just kind of a mud wall covered in rocks. It's maybe 15 feet, 20 feet high. It can provide a challenge for somebody that's probably not in good physical shape or has never ever experienced something like that. But for 99% of the people, you just take your times, and the porters are incredible. They'll hold your hand and they'll grab you and push you and get you up the wall. So there's no real difficulty in it. And it's just another time to kind of bond and get with the whole group. So when you get to the summit night, again, it can be a difficult experience for some people. It can be very cold. And now you're at literally, 19, 20,000 feet, 940. So you are 19.5 in that neighborhood. So you really are beginning to experience serious high altitude. And if you haven't acclimatized, you haven't slept well, you haven't stayed hydrated, people can get altitude sickness. That is not uncommon. So it's very important to do self-care to take care of yourself. Drink a lot of water, get those calories in. You typically go to bed around 6 o'clock at night after dinner, get up around midnight, and you start heading up. You watch the sun rise over the plains of Africa as it shines on Kilimanjaro, and it's just an awesome experience. You get almost to the top of the crater, and then you head over to Stella Point. Then you go over to the true summit just a little bit further, look into the summit crater where you see those glaciers, and you think about how close you are to the equator. Similar to the last podcast, I talked about how there's snow on Karsten's Pyramid in New Guinea, which was surprising to many people because it's so close to the equator. Kilimanjaro is the same type of thing, where it's so close to the equator, you think there's no way there's going to be snow there, but there is. There's glaciers. And they are melting, but hopefully the measures that Tanzania has taken will preserve those for decades, if not centuries to come, for the enjoyment of all the visitors that come in the future. You go up there, you stay for, the typical summit time, you stay for a few minutes or maybe half an hour at the most, depending upon the weather, how you're feeling, your teammates, your schedule. And then a lot of people go all the way back down to the gate that next day, which makes for a phenomenally long day. A more civilized approach is to camp halfway down, where you get to rest up after your summit night. It could be a long summit night. You can be 8, 10, 12 hours to get up and back down to the high camp, and then another 6, 8 hours to go down the mountain. The porters, again, are just fantastic. They're carrying everything for you. They're guiding the way. If you start to suffer some type of sickness, then typically they'll help you diagnose your problem. They are not shy about turning you around. And also, if you go with a Western company, that you have a European or an American or a Australia, New Zealand, whatever guide, they'll also turn you around if you start to act kind of crazy, showing signs of altitude sickness. So all in all, again, it's a pretty safe and civilized environment. But on that summit, it's just absolutely stunning looking into the glacier-filled summit crater of the volcano, watching the sun come up, celebrating with your teammates. And seeing the diversity of the people, especially the diversity of the ages, young people, families, friends coming together. I've seen, fraternities and sororities make it as an annual trip. And it's just really a great, fantastic cultural experience, really a highlight. However, what I think is even a better highlight is going on a safari afterwards. We took a little bush plane and flew over to a little landing strip on a grass strip in the Serengeti, immediately greeted by a herd of wild buffalo. By the way, if you're listening to this on audio, I've got a lot of pictures, not only of the Kilimanjaro climb, but also of the safari on my website at alanarnette.com, as well as on the YouTube video, which you can find by searching my name there. But the Serengeti, oh my gosh, is something that you see. This is what National Geographic and other, the Marlin Perkins Wild World back in the day would go and visit the Serengeti. You see, all the animals that you always hear about: giraffes, elephants, lions, leopards, baboons, hyenas, black rhino, just absolutely incredible. You ride in these open air Land Rovers. The guides that are there employed by the guide companies in the Serengeti, they are just phenomenally knowledgeable. They're friendly. They'll answer any question that you have. There's probably not a question they've never heard, and they're very generous with their knowledge and with their time. And it makes just for a wonderful, wonderful experience. We spent about 3 days doing safaris in the area there, including going to the Gora Gora crater, one of the world's largest, a previously collapsed volcano, where we saw even more animals, including that rare black rhino that I mentioned. So if you do get a chance, I mean, I think just going for the safari by itself is worth the price of admission. But if you can combine the two, you get kind of the best of both worlds. So in summary, Kilimanjaro is a cultural experience. Starts off in Moshi, then the climb, the trek itself, going through the microclimates and with the porters and seeing the glaciers, the snows of Kilimanjaro, as Kipling noted, and then going to the Serengeti for a safari. It doesn't get much better than that. I don't know where it ranks in terms of mountain climbing, and I think that doesn't even really matter because it is the highest in Africa, so it is clearly one of the seven summits. So it ticks that box if that's what you're going to do. But regardless, go for the experience. If you let it, it'll change your life forever, just through the culture, through the people, through the animals, and through your personal experience and your personal satisfaction of standing on the highest point in the African continent. All right. Climb on. This is Alan. And remember, memories are everything.